Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spincast. Today, we are going back into the casting world, showing everybody what casting is really about with a great caster. Today, we are joined by Alan, a.k.a. IHOLDSHIFT. He's done a ton of casting work in the professional realm with Call of Duty and some other games as well. So without further ado, Alan, IHOLDSHIFT, go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell us where your passion started in gaming and esports and kind of how that took you to your current career with casting.
Well, first of all, I didn't realize this was called the Spincast. You should probably reconsider and call it the Spin Cycle. Just to make it, I love that little Spin Cycle action.
Okay.
My 2 cents. That one's free. The next one's going to cost you. But right. No, it's one of those things that I've actually kind of fell into esports. I went to school to be a teacher, to be a history teacher. And when I graduated, the dynamic in the education world was not favorable to teachers if you were not a math or a science teacher. So I wasn't really able to find a job out of college. Spent a couple of years substitute teaching. And at one point in time, right around when I graduated, I was kind of playing games still here and there and at a relatively decent level, and got a chance to kind of broadcast over one of those games for a national qualifier. And it was just the first time I've ever done it. No idea what to expect. Never really done anything like it before in that time period. Your Mavens, your Golden Boys, your Puckets, they weren't like where they are now. So there really wasn't like a role model to like look to be like, oh, this is what esports commentary looks like. But I quite enjoyed it. And I got a lot of very positive feedback saying that a lot of viewers enjoyed watching it. And from there, I kind of started looking at it in a little bit more serious of a light. I kind of picked up doing stuff with a game called Paladins, ran by High Res Studios. Got involved with that, fell in love with the game, fell in love with the community. Was fortunate enough to work alongside that production studio for the better part of 3 years, where they were bringing me on to do a lot of their major LAN events. So like my first time truly casting on LAN was with High Res Studios. And then once I kind of watched more, saw more, and kind of watched over my own stuff more, I realized that this very well could be a potential career path for me. And I took it a lot more seriously. And you mentioned, I've been doing a lot of stuff with Call of Duty. That's been about 2 years and change now that I've been kind of working with it. And it got to a point where I quit my job. I was just kind of making ends meet, working as a server for a while I was kind of doing content. But once I realized that if I was going to do it, I had to go in full time and do it all the way out, fullest level, because the last thing you want is to not make it and then look back saying, well, what if I would have, done this or done that? And so I didn't want to have those regrets. Just completely quit my job, went all in, and it's led to some progress, to be sure. And it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I always love to see those kind of like mini success stories, especially in esports, because so many people, the opportunities kind of just land on them. And obviously the successful ones take them and run, like yourself. So that's awesome. So diving a little bit, diving deeper into casting itself, take us through, for the audience that doesn't quite understand what audience looks like behind the scenes.
Sure.
Take us through what a day looks like for you, going into your prep meetings, going into the casting itself, and kind of all the moving parts that help you be successful from the production standpoint. And then also the, effort, time, and importance, emphasis that you put in on your side as well.
It's actually interesting. I see both worlds because I've done a couple of things with major affiliates like Activision Blizzard. I was at one of their local events last year for CW Anaheim, and I've worked alongside people like Esports Engine now in this last year doing stuff with Modern Warfare. But I also do a lot of my work with kind of independent organizations that are running as like online tournament providers, just little small third parties that are trying to get themselves up and running. And there is a very big switch between the two of them. For instance, like this upcoming weekend, I'll be on the Call of Duty Challengers broadcast. And for that scene specifically, it's not just, showing up and making sure your microphone sounds good, your webcam looks good, and then off we go. And I think if you ask any caster out there, they'll give you a different answer for that question. For me personally, I want to know as much as I possibly can about every single instance of players, teams, organizations, their history, what they've done recently, as well as, what are their storied pasts, and kind of build up an opportunity to build a narrative to foreshadow what might occur. And I think that in general, the casters that are at the quote unquote elite level will give you something similar when it comes to that response. But I think of what do they do to get to that level? Everyone works very differently. Some people spend a lot of time just sitting and watching previous VODs with their duo or even as an individual to try to learn the team's like individual movements. Others like to look at statistics and try to find a way to see if the numbers can speak to them. I try to do a little bit of both. I've got a handful of spreadsheets for the COD team specifically that are very, very well comprehensive to everything that's happened individually over this last calendar year. But at the same point, I do spend a lot of time looking over previous and recent VOD. So that way I can kind of get an idea as far as, all right, where are they looking good? Where are they looking bad? And how does that kind of relate to some of the numbers that I'm looking at? So I kind of try to take multiple pieces and kind of bake a cake with those ingredients there. But yeah, it's a lot more than just showing up and hoping that you sound good on microphone. I mean, tech tests, call times, they can look very different depending on who you're working with. And especially, again, like you had mentioned, this is a COVID-filled world where everybody's starting to really learn at the highest level what online broadcasting looks like. So one weekend to the next, there could be a completely different system that you are not only having to learn as a caster, but you also have to learn how to work with your production studio or your production specialist to make sure that both sides look and sound and feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've been on that production side a good bit. And kind of changing out softwares. Like there's some accepted ones, like OBS Studios is pretty widely used for this and open source. So it's awesome. vMix is also popular, but now talking to a lot of different production companies, people are building out basically a lot of really in-depth production on game engines, which is just crazy to like kind of like start to dive into. And then you're looking at it and I'm like, wait, that's just way over my head. But yeah, that's awesome to see. Kind of diving in, you touched on a number of different things I want to pick apart a little bit. You talked about, studying the teams and that, and really understanding them. So talk about like how close casting still is to playing the game specifically. So how much game knowledge do you do? I know you talked about VOD for the team specific stuff, but how much time do you invest in either playing the game or analyzing the game? So you can also comment on your perspective of maybe where their flaws are or their successes of whoever you're casting.
Sure. So it's really funny that my initial reaction when I heard you say that is casters always get a bad rep, like in the community, like this caster doesn't know what he's talking about. He's only platinum in the game's matchmaking system. Look, I'm 32 years old. I do not have the dexterity in my hands anymore to play at a high level like I used to when I was a kid. And it's just really funny that I think as like a public community perception, it's all about how good is the caster at the game. That's how much they know. And it's just so funny because if you were to take like Joe Buck, I don't think that guy's touched a baseball in years, but he's casted the World Series every single year.
Exactly.
It's a lot of, I think that, yes, having a handle on the game is important. I'm not trying to say that it's not. But if people were to sit there and think that the individual matchmaking through ranked immediately turns into the competitive experience as far as understanding it, there is such a wide disconnect. Because if I join in like right now in Call of Duty and play the CDL playlist, I'm playing with 4 random guys, and my individual skill means nothing when it comes to trying to break down how certain teams are breaking or holding things like hardpoint hills and stuff like that. But that said, there definitely has to be a little wiggle in play. I was one of those guys, like I mentioned, a very mouse and keyboard based background when I was playing and kind of in a competitive esports world when I was, still a kid. And I was not familiar to playing things on controller. So when I first started getting into Call of Duty, I knew that I needed to pick up the controller to see what it felt like, and that helps you rationalize when you see something that's impressive, why it's impressive, because you have your own at least base of like, okay, I know for a fact that I can't do anything like that, and seeing how much of a gap there is between my old hands versus what these kids are doing, that's where you kind of build your scope and your kind of scale as far as how impressive is a moment that you're seeing on screen right now. So I think it is very, very important. But when it comes to the polarity of how much time am I spending playing versus how much of my time like watching, analyzing, and building up my notes, it's probably like an 80-20. I'm spending a lot more time watching, kind of breaking things down, going over my own previous casts to see where I can improve, what I may have missed on, rather than just sitting in, a public playlist and trying to get better at the game individually. Because I feel like that only gets you so far when it comes to being able to really explain articulately at a high level what the audience is seeing on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that, like, basically along your point is that you know, the playing aspect of esports is such a small percentage compared to whatever your workload is, right? Whether it's casting or production or,
Right.
you know, something in business as well. Like everything's based in the game. Obviously, without the game, without the players, esports wouldn't exist. But you'd have that basic understanding. So you understand, like you said, wow, that guy just made an insane play. But at the same time, you put way more effort in your little area of casting,
Sure.
your corner, right?
Yeah.
So I would love to see that kind of discerned out where, like, you know, it's that community sense of, oh, you cast, that means you just sucked when you played. Like, no.
Well, it's one of
That
those
means
things too,
nothing.
like, a prime example of kind of that learning curve. Over the last weekend, one of the community members, his name's Cheeto, he threw on this massive throwback tournament for Call of Duty World War II. I had never played the game, and I've never seen the game, but it was free on the PlayStation Network. So the first thing that I did when I said, hey, I'm going to go learn this game, is before I even stepped away to even watch previous VOD, I stepped into the game itself to play it. And I played for, you know, maybe 3-4 hours a day. And then before I went to bed, I would watch about 3-4 hours of VOD from World Champs. So there is something to be said for playing the game to learn it while also seeing previous experience as far as like how people have casted it before. So that way you can learn things like call outs specifically and, you know, how to kind of function on the map and, you know, what it feels like as far as a broadcast goes. So there definitely is a little bit of both that goes into it without a doubt.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was saying, like having that defined perspective from broadcasting or production or camera angles or marketing, like it's all based in the game.
Yeah.
But you have to put so much more attention to everything else to make your product perfect, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Kind of looking back, thinking back, you know, you talked a lot about, you know, going from a substitute teacher to where you are now as a caster. Is there any like particular points of improvement that you really kind of like look back on, like, wow, that's exactly how I got better in itself? Is there any particular avenue that you would like recommend to someone of like, this is a good way to start to get better with your casting skill base?
I will say that, you know, I think one of the things that I look back on is that I wish I would have done this sooner. You know, because I feel like if I were younger, I would probably have a little bit more, I won't say recognizability, but definitely a little bit more of a personality as a younger person to kind of come through. So I would say first and foremost, if it's someone out there that wants to get involved, there is no such thing as being too young to start. But one of the things that I could say looking back, even in the last 2 years, that have led to some of my progress as an individual content creator, caster, whatever it is, even if you're out there as a streamer, is to set yourself reasonable and obtainable goals. I feel like for a lot of people that specifically are in the commentary side of things, they're going out there and they're just doing it. You know, I'm going to go and I'm going to reach out to this organization. They give me a chance. I'm just going to go do it. As an individual, like I was mentioning, there was really at the time that I started broadcasting and doing commentary where I didn't really have anybody to look up to sit there and say, this is who is setting the stage, you know, for what it looks like to be an elite broadcaster. And my biggest kind of feat for progress was really, really specifically pointing out every little detail that I noticed about myself when I watched my casts back. Self-critique VOD review, I will still maintain to the day, is one of the best things that I do. I think that allows me to grow. I think a lot of that is also kind of, you know, I listen to myself and I compare what I hear to the idols that I kind of have. One of my favorite duos in all of broadcast commentary are Eddie Olczyk and Mike Emmerich from the NHL. I think that their polarity as a duo is incredible, and I kind of use them, even in traditional sports, as like, okay, I love what they're doing here. How could I kind of do that, but with esports? So I take a little bit of what I like and I listen to myself and say, okay, that moment right there was awkward. What could I say differently, or how could I frame this differently so that way I think it sounds more like what I want it to sound like? That said, though, you know, I feel like that kind of diligence is also much more assisted by having somebody else listen to your stuff. I feel like if you can trust your own work ethic when it comes to pre-planning and kind of post breaking down your stuff, that's all great. But when you've got another ear, another set of eyes and ears to listen to what you've been doing, and even if it's feedback that you don't necessarily like, it at least gets you thinking outside your normal comfort zone. So it's kind of like you would do like a normal homework situation in high school or college where someone's peer reviewing you. Same idea. That's the best way to kind of open your gaze a little bit and see what you could be doing differently, whether it is pre-planning or things that you're saying or things like cadence and flow when you're actually in the live commentary side of things. But self-critique, I would say at the end of it, is where I found my most amount of growth for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more there. Self-critique, and something that I always highlight when I talk to students that are up and coming in casting or playing or whatever in esports is that, failure is okay, right? Learn from little mistakes. Learn from like, oh my God, I said two sentences there that it made no sense.
Right.
So like, kind of figure out, okay, if I said this instead, that was way more in flow with the cast. So like you said, going back, reviewing yourself and realizing, learning from the mistakes or the little mishaps is always goes such a long way.
And setting
So
goals with that too is the
yeah.
other thing, and I guess I touched on that at the beginning and then kind of
Mhm.
lost my train of thought. But, when I was getting into Call of Duty, I made sure before I did anything that I was looking at the entire scene and say, where are my opportunities to have an impact? And I immediately saw it on YouTube first. And my whole goal was I'll do YouTube. I'm going to cast as much as I possibly can. And I want to be a consideration for CW Anaheim. I felt like those were very obtainable goals given the environment as I kind of assessed it. And then this last year, after I'd been able to meet those goals was, okay, what's the next step? It's hard to sit there and do one thing and say, all right, I'm going to just go to the CDL. I'm going to be a CDL caster. Like that's, again, it takes a lot to get to that point. And so my goal this year was to be everywhere challengers. Whenever there was something going on in the semi-pro amateur scene, I was going to be affiliated in some way or form. If I'm not casting it, I want to cover it on YouTube. If I am casting it, how can I make sure that people know that I'm casting it? So it's trying to find a way to, again, set yourself up for success and not just be there and sit here and say that, yeah, the overall goal is to be at the top, to be on the main stage and casting alongside people like Maven, Merck, Benson, Chance, and Miles and Momo. But how do you get there? Just saying that is so far reaching. It's just one of those things that you should know yourself best and try to set yourself up to get to a point where you might be able to reach that eventual goal.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. And having that clearly defined goal pathway, right? How do I get from A to Z? You got to get through B, C, D, E, F, and so on and so forth. If
Exactly.
you just try to go straight from A to Z, there's 24 letters in between you, right? For like lack of a better analogy, but you have to be able to get across every, hurdle or opportunity, right? Exactly. So one thing you touched on there was your content creating side with your YouTube. So talk a little bit more about what goes into content creation and how that directly, helps boost your kind of portfolio as a caster.
I think it kind of is another avenue where you can showcase not only your knowledge and your kind of passion for the scene as a whole, but you get a chance to showcase your personality. I feel like most people, especially in the Call of Duty world, when they go to YouTube, they're going there because they want to see the personality of you first, more than necessarily the content-specific portions of whatever you're making. And that was one way that I feel like, for me personally, people got to know me. Not only because, again, I felt like in the Call of Duty space, there were not enough content creators doing the Pro League kind of specific recaps and stuff like that. Tactical Rab has been doing it. Lando's been doing it, and they do an incredible job. But their content was very different than how I kind of envisioned how I would do it. And bringing that to life was something that definitely helped, I think, the community get to know me. And kind of build some familiarity with who I am as a person rather than just another caster who's up and coming. And I do say for aspiring commentators, the best thing you could do is diversify yourself in as many ways as possible. Showing up and just doing play-by-play commentary, even if you're incredible at it, might not get you the appeal of being able to do things like a podcast as well, or doing things like making a YouTube video where it comes down to this moment. Even in my own commentary, I noticed what can I do to try to find a different side of that? Try to hit it from every single angle rather than just try to spearhead your way forward. The content side of things for me was always kind of used as an avenue to pave my commentary specifically. Mm-hmm. So I was never looking at YouTube as like, I'm going to be a full-time content creator. It was always in kind of like flank and support of what I want to do in commentary specifically. So that's the way that I kind of looked at it and used it as more of a tool than necessarily like a crutch or something like that.
Yeah. It's just another, like you said, another tool in the tool chest that you can use. And I think I really like how you highlighted, connecting a person to the voice, so to say.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of casters out there, I can hear great casting, but if I don't know the person or understand the person, then like, I may never ask them to cast again, not because I don't like them, but because like when I think of casters, someone else that's more prevalent, like, hey, I can match a personality to.
Exactly.
And I've talked to them or anything like that, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, yeah, let's go get those three guys. Because that's the first thing that pops in your head. So that's just great for long-term success and short-term success.
Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Absolute fantastic conversation here. I will leave you with one last question. You have so much experience in a number of different fronts within casting and the content side on YouTube, also in LAN events, online events, so on and so forth. What is one place, or kind of looking at the future, what's one goal that you want to reach for the industry as a whole? Where do you think events or these, large scale tournaments should trend to, whether it's a specific change or improvement? What's one thing that you could really see bolster esports to the next big thing? Because it's growing that way, it's trending that way. Everyone
It
says
really
it
is.
but I don't think it's quite landed as like a global phenomenon yet, if that makes sense.
I think that I'm going to take the easy way out. I think that the city geolocated franchising is an incredible step in the right direction when it comes to becoming more familiar to the general audience as a whole, whether it is esports specific or not. I think that that is an incredible idea, and it is a platform that should boast success because, again, it's one of those things that's like, if I had never been following esports and I'm getting into it for the first time, even in, let's just say Call of Duty this year, I'm brand new to Call of Duty. Maybe last year I was brand new to Call of Duty. I don't know who to root for between E United and Optic and FaZe Clan. I don't know anything about any of these organizations, any of these players. And the person who's looking at the first time, maybe it is someone who is playing Call of Duty on like after they're done with work, and all of a sudden you see that little announcement like, hey, the professional Call of Duty League is happening this weekend. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to watch that. I've got no idea who to root for. But going into this year, I'm from Chicago initially. The Chicago Huntsmen are playing. I'm immediately rooting for the Chicago Huntsmen, whether I know anybody on that team or not, whether I'm super invested into that squad or not. It's the fact that they're from Chicago that automatically pulls me deeper in than just looking at an E United or a FaZe Clan that I've got no idea who they are, where they're from, or what their background is. I know that they're from Chicago. I'm from Chicago. I immediately identify with that team. And then maybe they're not doing very well. Okay, I actually like what this guy said in his interview. Now I'm a Clayster fan, and I'm actually a Dallas Empire fan. It just gets gets the ball rolling in the right way. I just think when it comes down to where do you go from here and how do you make sure that these geolocated franchises are successful, I feel like teams and organizations as a whole need to find a way to take that local identity to the next level, to where it's not just I'm a city, here's my city name and franchise brand, but I'm also working inside my community to make sure that I am an influence. I feel like that's one thing that gets really overlooked because, again, in the professional sports world, like the play 60 things that the NFL does, those are like, okay, cool, like good for you, NFL, like you're helping out kids. But what that means for those kids is that they are now lifelong fans of that organization. They're going to grow up watching it. They're going to grow up buying that gear, identifying with those players. And for the most part, I feel like esports organizations are only just tipping their toe into the water right now and are not fully diving into that. And I think that's a super important thing where it's not going to blow up overnight. Esports is here. It's going to stay, but it's a generational thing. Like the older generations, 40-plus-year-olds, are not going to immediately get into esports. The people that will are the people that are 10, 13, 14 years old right now that are sitting and playing Fortnite, and they're loving the stories that they get from individual players. I think the more that local communities can find a way to assimilate themselves with their geolocated franchises, once we start to get those kids that are 18 plus, you're going to see things like population at events go up. You're going to see franchise merchandising sales go up. I think you're going to start to see all that stuff kind of progress. So it's definitely not something that's going to change overnight, but something that I think if you hit them young, you'll keep them as lifelong fans for a long time.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with that, because I think that's the biggest shortcoming of a lot of esports orgs, like you said, is that they're only ever going to be, not only ever, they're catering currently to the esports community specifically, right? For esports to be the global phenomenon, you have to apply, or, you have to be, you have to apply yourself to the entire globe, right?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of a better way to say that, but you have to be part of the global community, not just the esports community. Because the esports community is great, but it's just, maybe 10% of the entire world. You want the other 90%. And I think those geocentric locations is that step in the right direction. But still a long pathway to go, right?
Long path to go.
Sure. So, yeah, unfortunately, we are out of time there. Alan, IHOLDSHIFT, thank you so much. I think you shed a lot of great insight on the casting world and some esports themes in general that are commonly overlooked. So real quick, plug yourself. tell the audience where they can find you if they want to keep up with your work at any time.
So yeah, I'm IHOLDSHIFT. You can find me on just about every social platform at IHOLDSHIFT. No finesse with things like an L instead of an I or an underscore here or there. You probably mostly find me on places like Twitter if you want to keep up with the content that I'm making for groups like Checkmate Gaming, and when I'm on broadcast and stuff like that, that's probably the best place to find me for sure.
Awesome. IHOLDSHIFT straight up. Nothing fancy, like you said. Thank you again for joining us today. Absolute great time talking about a number of different things in the esports industry. To all the viewers, thanks for staying the entire time. Stay healthy and stay happy in the current pandemic, and ultimately, stay plugged in.